spirits. Many of those spirits were in animal form. So it's no surprise really that Roman writers wrote about ospreys and other birds as they did. But by 400 or so AD, the writing was already on the wall, and the Romans were being threatened in all parts of their empire by tribes from the north, and the image and east, like Anglo-Saxons, Vandals, Goths, all sorts of people which are familiar to us in our history lessons today. And the period that follows was the antithesis of what we've seen before in Greece, Rome, and their learning. Perhaps the image of the Dark Ages, as it later became known, is something like this. But in fact, it was just a period in which learning was set aside, and we find very few references to the sort I've just given you. In fact, for hundreds of years during that time, perhaps 500 to the end of the first millennium, I couldn't find any references to ospreys at all. I tried the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and there are birds in there, but mainly from the point of view of food and superstitions. And the Domesday Book similarly is mainly concerned with domesticated animals and so on, so there's nothing there. It's not till we get into the Middle Ages proper that we begin to wake up again. I thought I might find something in a famous book about falconry. Falconry was very popular with all classes of society, and there's a book called the Book of St. Albans, 1486. And as you can see from that, the osprey is conspicuous by its absence. But then I thought to me, not surprising. First of all, it's a migratory bird. So a bird that migrates wherever it happens to be, north or south, is not going to be much use to somebody who's trying to train it for falconry. And also, of course, it's a fish eater exclusively. And so was it likely to be able to be trained to bring a fish back? I don't think so. And if it did, it would no doubt be minus the head anyway. So falconry books were absolutely no use at all. Of course, the lack of sources about ospreys doesn't mean they weren't there. I think, in common with many other people, in fact, this was a bit of a golden age for wildlife. It was still there, and probably the range of the osprey during this period extended, and it was able, in a time without firearms, they hadn't been invented yet, without chemicals, without interference, without habitat destruction. The birds like the ospreys and many, many other species, hundreds, thousands of other species, did rather well. But without the evidence in that period, we have to just assume that the ospreys went on with their twice yearly migrations, and also with their lives in general. Okay, maybe to use one of John Wright's lovely pictures now, people did see them, whether they were angry with them for stealing their fish in their moats in chateaux in France like this one, or they still did watch them with admiration, maybe a touch of fear as well, as they dived into the water. But they were still there. There's no doubt about that. Even though we don't have much evidence for that period, I'm sure they were there. Two more big dates for you, and don't worry, by the way, if I'm going too quickly for you. There is a source list which I've prepared, and if you let Harriet know at the end, she will be able to send you a copy of the source list. So what's going on here? Two big dates, 1454 and 1460. This is in fact 1460. The man in the middle demonstrating and holding the manuscript is William Caxton, and he's showing some rich clients how his Westminster press is worked. And of course, this is a breakthrough for us looking for sources, the invention of the printing press. Because after this date, I, for one, found it much easier to find references to ospreys, as you'll see. And from now on, we've got sources, written and illustrated sources. So here is Caxton's Press being demonstrated. I'm glad to see, by the way, I like this picture. Look at all the screwed up bits of paper under the desk. So it wasn't a flawless process, but when it came off, it had a great impact at getting information, thoughts and studies out there amongst the people. And of course, it meant a great more people learning to read. That's important too. And the languages in which they learned were still Latin, but some English. And one of the books which of course benefited the most was the Bible, which was printed hundreds and thousands of times for people to read. I don't know how often you look at Leviticus. I think it's the third book in the Old Testament. And lo and behold, it has a reference to an osprey. Not a very good one, but if you look it up, you'll find this. And these you shall have in abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, the osprey, blah, 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 all the way through. And they obviously thought a bat at the end was a bird, because that gets a mention as well. So the Old Testament does have that reference to an osprey, showing that they were known. No, it's not an eagle, it's not a vulture, it's or a kite or a falcon, it's an osprey, which stood alone. And there's another reference in Deuteronomy, if you want to look up that as well. And as I said, learning increased. School teachers were employed by rich families to educate sons and daughters and to teach them about the world they were growing up in. This particular one is interesting for us because it shows a schoolmaster called Roger Ascham, 1570, talking to one of his students, and she's quite famous as well, a sad and tragic figure called Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen. She was very clever, very scholarly, and especially liked learning about the world around her in her youth. She was only very young when she was pushed into by her ambitious parents, and we all know the result of that. She was executed at a very young age while still in her teens, and that all happened at Bradgate Park, the picture before, and that's what it looks like now. So hurrying on, 1544 we're up to now, and this book came out, Turner on Birds, the first really official bird book in the English language. And Dr. William Turner, 1544, Henry VIII was king. He just had to deal in a rather serious way with his fifth wife, Catherine Howard. He'd broken off from the Church of Rome. There were wars threatening with France, and yet someone, i.e. William Turner, was writing the first British bird book. And the great thing about it is that he adds his own little notes. One quote: "The osprey is a bird much better known today to Englishmen than many who keep fish in their ponds would wish, for within a short time it will bear off every fish. Our anglers smear or mix their bait with osprey fat, arguing that thus the bait will prove more efficacious from the fact that, when the osprey hovers in the air, whatever fishes he below turns up and show their whitish bellies, that it may choose which one it prefers." It was a widespread belief, you might not know this, that when an osprey flew over, all the fish would turn belly up. I'm not sure where that came from, but it's mentioned in more than one book. 1544. And after that, we find a lot of illustrations and references to ospreys. For instance, 1570, John Keyes, said, "Ospreys are abundant with us on sea coasts and in the Isle of Wight. Our people call them ospreys or fishhawks." Again, William Harrison, 1586. The familiar osprey, i.e. it was common, lots of people saw it. The familiar osprey hath one foot like a hawk's to catch hold withal, and another resembling a goose wherewith to swim. Wrong, of course, but he had noticed that there was something strange about osprey feet. We all know about the reversible toe, and sometimes an osprey does carry a fish in one foot and clenches the other one so that it might look like a webbed foot. All this, remember, without the use of advanced optics that we have. Another one, this is George Peele, a 16th century writer of plays and pageants. He says, "I will provide thee of a princely osprey, that as he flieth over fish in pools, the fish shall turn their glistering bellies up, and thou shalt take thy liberal choices of all." 1594 that was written. Perhaps the most famous quote of all is about this man seated in the middle. His full name, a Roman general called Gaius Marcius, better known as Coriolanus. William Shakespeare in 1608 published his last tragedy called Coriolanus. In this course of this rather long and uninteresting play, I'll tell you a little story in a minute, Coriolanus is engaged in preparations for an attack on his own city, Rome, following a period of banishment. A leading general in the attack describes how he thinks Coriolanus will lead his forces on the morrow. And he says, "I think he'll be to Rome as is the osprey to the fish, who takes it by sovereignty of nature." And the story I was going to tell you is that I sat through what seemed like hours in Stratford upon Avon, just waiting for that quote about an osprey. And it comes in Act 4, Scene 7, so I had a long wait. But when I heard it, I really smiled. I think people with me must have thought, or around me must have thought I'd gone slightly mad. So I felt like leaving at that point. That was the highlight of the play. A fine simile that actually, it didn't actually take place because Coriolanus never did actually invade Rome. Now this man, the writer perhaps of the first ever proper bird book, Francis Willoughby, and there's the first page of his book. And if your Roman numeral knowledge is up to it, you'll see at the bottom, this is from 1678. 3 books wherein all the birds hitherto known are not only described, but actually drawn. Of course, there's mistakes, but it's the first ornithology book in the English language. The Osprey page is a bit of a letdown, but it does have some clues. The bottom picture is called Haliitis ossifragus, blah, 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 the sea eagle or osprey. Well, it's certainly not an osprey, that one, is it? But at least the words are there. And this next man, Linnaeus, Swedish, took the story one step further. He wanted to categorize everything, classify the whole of nature, everything, every animal, every plant, every insect, everything had to be classified and given a Latin name. And he went back to the old Haliitis name, but he called it Falco Haliitis. Falco Haliitis. And we still reckon upon his word names today. But the man who, oh, and there's the picture. They're beginning to look a little bit more like ospreys now. So many of the early pictures show what must be considered to be juveniles. This, you know, with the white fringes on the, so I suppose it's perhaps because juveniles were more obtainable by this time. And that one definitely is. But it's called Falco Haliitis. And here's the man, French, called Savigny, got a rather brilliant name, Marie-Jules César Savigny, who first decided that wouldn't do, falco haliitis, because it wasn't a falco, he said. It's not like the other falcos. This one, it's got different muscles, it's got different feather, it's got different bone structure. It needs to stand on its own. So here, for the first time, in 1828, quite late, we find Pandyon haliitis being used as the name, Pandyon. Why Pandyon? Well, I haven't got time to tell you the whole story of Pandyon. Suffice it to say for the moment, and you can find out yourself later if you follow in the source list, Pandyon was a king of Athens, legendary, and his story is told in the vast treasury of Greek myths. He's generally considered the good guy in a bloodthirsty and violent story of betrayal, murder, and mutilation. So perhaps we can forgive Savigny for his choice. At the end of the story, everybody is changed into some bird or other, and Pandyon, he thought would be a good name because he was a noble king who tried his best to stop the slaughter of the story. And so when the Osprey came up for a name, it was Savigny who said, I know, we'll call it Pandyon. Look that story up. It's certainly X-rated, I should warn you. And there's the two daughters from the story. They were the ones who really were the center of it, both victims of murder and betrayal and mutilation and all those things. Meanwhile, while all that was going on and Pandyon was being given the name, pictures are beginning to look a bit more like ospreys, a bit. This one is 1830 something, I think, maybe a little later, from a book by Mark Catesby about the birds of America. Beginning to look a bit more like an osprey. Oh, a bit backwards here because we're going backwards. This is from 1789. Again, it must be a young osprey that's being used for the picture, but they're still common. The writer here, the names escape me for that moment for that one, but it's 1789, and it's got frequents the seashore, rivers and lakes, blah, 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 etc. This man, I think, deserves a bit more praise. This is Lord Lillford, who had a home near Oundle in Northamptonshire and was a great ornithologist and wrote several books. He wrote diaries as well, and he records a visit by an osprey to his stretch of the River Nene. And he says in his diary, I had a visit from Pandyon today on my stretch of the river. I was grappling with a big pike at the time, so could not get a glass on him, but he looked like a bird of the year. I've sent clear orders that any keeper molesting him whilst on our stretch will be summarily dismissed, but I fear for him once he leaves our water. And that's the point of this, because while the pictures of ospreys were getting better, the numbers of ospreys were in fact going down. And the Victorian and Edwardian ages, which Lillford lived through, were the worst possible scenario for not only the osprey, but so many other birds of prey and all other birds and wildlife. It's the darkest period, I think, in British wildlife history, because species after species was decimated and driven to extinction. And while the pictures got better, ospreys got fewer and fewer. And as is well documented, by the 1840s, there were no breeding ospreys in England. They survived a little bit longer in Scotland, but they were soon really, really rare passage birds only. The pictures are a little bit odd still. This is by a Dutch artist, and it shows an impossible situation, really, a juvenile and chicks in the nest. So that perhaps was just to demonstrate. This one's by Thorburn, again, from the birds of Northamptonshire. I thought it looked a rather sad bird. I have been told by Tim Mackrill actually that youngsters, and here again, this is a young bird, do adopt that that position sometimes when resting with the head bowed like that. Again, this one's by J.C. Harrison, and looking quite a lovely picture, but at a time when the Osprey's fate had been sealed by the gun, the trap, and then the collector. Once things become rare, as we all know, the value goes up, and the last few Ospreys didn't survive, just did the artwork only. And it's in much more recent, coming up to the 21st century, where real expert artists, again, John Wright here, and his feather perfect studies of the two birds in Manton Bay back in 2017 really set a new standard, which is very, very good to see. And what a talent that man is. And there's another one by Jan Wiltshire. I purchased that from him with the familiar Burley on the Hill in the background at one of the last bird fairs that we had in the last one we had in 2019. A few people who have been responsible for not letting that be the end of the story. A young Roy Dennis, with his own mentor, George Waterson, took the huge decision back in the 50s not to keep an Osprey Eyrie private, but to allow the public under controlled conditions to come and visit it, and to glorify it, to celebrate it, and to make the collectors villains and criminals and pursue them relentlessly. They had lots of disappointments, but share a lot of the credit for bringing the Osprey in Scotland and subsequently England back to where it is. But what about England? It seemed that although they were recovering in Scotland, there would be no Ospreys in England. It was calculated they were moving south at a few kilometres a year, but it would take 50 to 100 years to get as far as central and even southern England. And so it was down to people at places like Rutland Water to think, well, how can we hurry this process up? And that story, I think, is familiar to a lot of you who are watching this evening. And here's a few of the people that were foremost in that. But it wasn't just them. There are hundreds, thousands and thousands of dedicated volunteers who brought the Osprey back to where it is today. And we're grateful to all of them. If you don't recognise any of these people, top row, Tim Appleton from the left, Roy Dennis again, Helen McIntyre, Tim Mackrill, of course, John Wright, not holding an Osprey there, but that looks like a young hen harrier to me. Fabulous field officer. Bottom row, Barry Galpin, who was responsible for the early website and the early tracking experiments. His wife Trish, seen there preparing the pens for the translocated ospreys in the 1990s. Lloyd Park, until recently a stalwart of Rutland Ospreys and Rutland Water Nature Reserve, and also Paul Stammers for many, many years, manager of the Linden Centre, here being grilled, I think, by one of our young Osprey ambassadors, Sam. But as I said, just a few. There's been so many others that we could have included there, and hundreds and thousands of volunteers without whom none of it would have been impossible. So here I stop, and I'm hoping that Abby will come in and take the story for the last part of the story.
Thank you, Ken. Hi, everyone. So as Ken has done a quick summary of bringing us fairly up to speed with the Rutland Osprey project, 25 years after the project began in 1996, the Rutland Osprey project now has a self-sustaining population of ospreys. Since the first chick was raised in 2001 at one of our off-site nests, by the famous Mr. Rutland, aka 0397, and his partner. We have seen 209 ospreys ringed from nest sites in Rutland. Oh, sorry, Ken, could you go back a slide, please? Can I have the last? Thank you. Looking at the return rate for ospreys, we usually say that ospreys, juvenile ospreys that is, has a 29 to 30% chance of survival. However, we see here in Rutland a slightly higher percentage of juveniles returning, which you can see here as 32%. And I did a little bit of a look at one of the nest sites in particular, the Manton Bay nest, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, looking at the years between 2010 and 2019. Of course, we don't expect juvenile ospreys to return for at least 2 or 3 years. So that's why I've gone just as far as 2019. Of the 25 chicks that Maya has raised with her partner, whether that be 5R04 or the current male 3311, 9 of them have returned to Rutland or elsewhere, such as in Wales or in the Netherlands in the Biesbosch National Park. And this equates to a 44% survival rate of their juveniles, which is incredible and fantastic. And hopefully we'll see that continue. And I don't know whether some of you are keeping up with our social media, but you can see that the 2 juveniles from this year have now left. So we'll keep our fingers crossed and hope we see them again sometime in the future. Next slide, please, Ken. So a big part of the work the project does has always been on the conservation side, of course, but also focusing on our engagement. And we do various talks for groups like this. We go into schools, we have host school visits to Linden in a normal year. And this has gone on to encourage young people to get involved in conservation. Like myself, it was because an element of why I got into conservation was because the Osprey education team, in fact it was Ken and Tim Mackrill, did come into my school, did a talk, and I was able to arrange a work experience. And from there I just started volunteering for the project on the reserve. But it hasn't just been in the UK that our work covers, and it's been elsewhere along the Osprey flyway. For example, out in Gambia in the Tangi region. And it just shows the education work that we've done has made a positive impact on how messages in conservation have gone on to permeate through communities as and abroad in Tangi as well. And you can see here that they're starting to beach clean and really become aware of the wildlife and nature around them. Ken, is there anything else you want to add with that?
No, I think that's fine, Abby. The bottom right picture is Whissendine School, and they're twinned now with a school, as Abby said, at Tangi, that we visited several times. And we're hoping once things settle down a bit, we can actually resume that with Zoom calls. And here you see the class at Whissendine with the letters that they're going to send. We actually took those letters out in January 2020, and the African children sent some really nice ones back. So a lot of work going on there to spread the message.
Okay, so the Rutland Translocation project was the first in its kind in Europe. However, it had already been done successfully in other countries or other areas such as America. Because of the success of the Rutland Osprey project and the Translocation project, various other similar reintroduction projects began across Europe, for example, in Spain, Italy, Portugal, and more recently, Switzerland. And all of these had the aim of helping re-establish a self-sustaining population of breeding ospreys, as in each of these countries, they would have seen a dramatic decline in their population, as we saw in our history. Next slide, please, Ken. So as you can see from this map, ospreys can now be found breeding at various places in England and Wales. Of course, they're up in Scotland, where they've got the stronghold. You can see that we have up to 10 breeding pairs here in Rutland. You've got 5 pairs in Wales, 7 in the Lake District, and 6 in Northumberland. But if you look to the south of England, we're very much lacking in a population of ospreys. And we know that once upon a time, ospreys were once widespread along the south coast, where the Old English name for the osprey was a mullet hawk. But they only became frequent visitors in the spring and autumn, of course, on their spring and autumn migrations. So, in light of that, next slide, Ken. In light of that, a new translocation project began down in Poole Harbour, which was set up by the Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation in partnership with the Birds of Poole Harbour and Wildlife Windows. And this project began in 2017, which aimed to restore a breeding population of ospreys to the south coast of England. And so far, of those 60 juveniles the translocation project over the course of its years would see 60 juveniles return, reintroduced to Poole Harbour, sorry. And so far, of the ones that have been reintroduced, 3 translocated birds have returned, including female with the ring number 014, and she bred for the first time in Wales this year, in fact, which is highly significant for the project. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering how this all ties in with us. Well, the female that has taken up residence down at Poole Harbour is in fact one of our birds. She, CJ17, fledged in 2015, but she first was seen in Poole Harbour down in Dorset early summer in 2017. And she originally landed with some of the released translocated birds, so they obviously attracted her attention. And ever since, she has returned each year. So next slide, please. Next slide, please, Ken. So it's all looking very promising for CJ7, as this year she was joined by one of the Poole Harbour's translocated chicks from 2019 022. And hopefully next year they both will return and breed for the first time next spring and raise the first wild chicks down in Poole Harbour for a long, long time. And you know, if this happens, it would be another brilliant and a legacy for us and for ourselves. And we very much look forward to seeing where the Poole Harbour project goes. Yeah. So as you know, 2021 is our 25th anniversary, and this year we have seen our 200th chick fledge from Rutland Water, from one of our off-site nests. It's a female chick this year, it's 360, and she's been seen after she fledged round local lakes and nearby. So we're hoping in a couple of years' time she comes back. And I had the privilege of holding her, which was fab. So yeah, now I'm just going to hand back over to Ken, I think.
Oh, thanks, Abby. That's a brilliant slide to finish with. And as you can see, it brings the story bang up to date. We've covered a huge amount of time and periods in history today. The written story alone is lasted about 2,500 years so far. The Osprey's had a bumpy ride, but it's back. The Osprey is back, and this time I'm sure it's for good. And as you can see, literally, and excuse the pun, I think the future of the Osprey is in very good hands. And I hope you all agree with me there. I have one more thing to say about someone else who was due to join us tonight. Tim Mackrill sends his apologies. He's currently in the Isle of Wight, working on the white-tailed eagle project. He phoned me just before we were due to present and said that his signal down there is just not strong enough to join the presentation. So I'm really sorry about that. But I hope you'll agree that Abby has provided us with all the amount of material that brings the story way up to date. So that's fantastic. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand back to Harriet. And I hope there's time for any questions that you might have to Abby or to me.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Abby. That was really interesting. Okay, does anybody have any questions? If you do, please just put them in the Q&A box or the chat box along the bottom, and then we will answer as many as we can. So we've got one from Duncan who's asking, would the sea eagle be seen in Greece?
Yes, I've seen sea eagles in Greece, definitely. They're not just coastal birds either. They inhabit inland lakes and marshes and so on. I think by the context of the quotes that I was giving, you can usually work out if it's an eagle or an osprey that's being referred to. And we have to remember that all the observations are first hand. And I do trust them. Yes, they make mistakes, but yes, as far as I know, there is no reason why a sea eagle shouldn't be seen in Greece. And I see from that little quote that's just come in, they have been seen over Leicester and over Rutland Water. I think Abby spotted one recently from the project that Tim Mackrill and others are working on down on the Isle of Wight right now.
Brilliant. Okay. So Martin is asking, how do you measure if they may have not returned to birth place but somewhere else? What is I think he's asking, what is the survival rate?
So the survival rates including all the birds that we've heard about, whether they've returned here or elsewhere. If obviously there might be some that we've never had a report from, so that could influence. However, yes, that's what we're basing our numbers on, the ones that we've had reports of, whether they be back to Rutland or elsewhere. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, Daisy is asking, what's the best way to see ospreys in the UK and how to get involved in osprey projects?
Well, it depends where you live. There's now several places in England and Wales and obviously in Scotland that you can visit to see the ospreys. They're best seen between middle of March and the end of August. Unfortunately, coming to the end of our season now, we've had several of our ospreys start to leave. But if you're local to Rutland Water, you're more than welcome to visit the Linden Visitor Centre and Nature Reserve, and we've got a couple of bird hides down there, one of which is manned with a volunteer and the live cam. So if you're unable to get to places, we've got a live webcam that we run throughout the season, and other osprey projects such as Dovey, Gladlin, and Poole Harbour have also got their live streams as well.
I would say if you live near somewhere that has an Osprey project, then most will be looking for volunteers as well. So that's probably the best way to get involved and learn more about it as well. Okay, I don't know if this is a how long is a piece of string question, but Stuart is asking, how long will it take to get a sustainable osprey population in Dorset?
Well, it's a case of being patient. These things don't happen overnight, and we've waited, you know, it's been 25 years before we can safely say we've got a self-sustaining population. All being well, and considering the likes of Roy Dennis and Tim Mackrill and everyone involved with the Suffolk Translocation project are now highly experienced, and always were. But I'd hope in, you know, the next 20, 25 years, they would be seeing a similar picture to what we're having.
Okay. Jeff is asking, do we know any more about the Suffolk translocation?
No more, so not at the moment, no.
Watch this space. Okay, we've got, do too many man-made nests risk ospreys losing their natural tendency to build nests from scratch?
No. So interestingly, me and Ken went around some of the off-site nests last week with Tim, and despite having, it was a non-breeder, despite having a nest on top of an artificial platform, this particular male had decided to build his own nest. So and in fact, 0397, he was the first osprey to breed in Rutland in 2001. A similar story, despite having multiple platforms, multiple artificial places to nest, he decided to build his own nest. So
they'll do their own thing if they want to.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, we've got one final question from Steph, who's asking, how long do ospreys live on average?
It all depends on their, you know, from rough on average, probably about 10 years. It depends on how successful they are on their migration. Some live longer, some don't. The oldest known breeding bird, I believe, was 27 years
Wow.
old. So fingers crossed Maya stays and lives that long, eh? But the oldest bird in our population at the moment is 16. Actually, no, she's 17. I can't do the maths. She's 17 and she's still breeding today. So.
Wow, okay, that's quite impressive. Is there a bigger proportion of males used in the translocation projects to encourage breeding in the area they're translocated to?
I'd say they try and keep it equal. I know that in 2005 we had to do a further translocation of 11 females because there was a slight gender imbalance. I think in an ideal world, maybe we'd have more females because females are more likely to wander and follow the site faithfulness, not as strictly as the males. But I think on the whole, they try and keep it as equal as possible. But yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, that looks like all the questions. If no one's got any last things they'd like to ask, we'll wrap up for the evening. So thank you very much, Ken and Abby, for joining us. That was really interesting. I think we've learned some new things about ospreys that we might not have known. So that's great. I forgot what I was going to say. So thank you everyone for joining us. We've had a lovely evening and we've had a great turnout from everybody. I hope you all found it interesting. If you'd like to give us a donation towards the Osprey project or to support the work we do for wildlife across Leicestershire and Rutland, please head to our website and you can leave a donation there. We are delighted to offer these talks for free, but we really appreciate any donations. And if you would like to find anything else out about the Ospreys, again, please head to our website and we've got lots of information there. We do have our live webcam, although I don't know, do we have any ospreys left? We do?
We do. We've got the 2 adults are still there, and actually the aim is to keep our live webcam on this year. It's been suggested that it's better for the equipment, so do keep watching, and hopefully we'll be focusing elsewhere along the bay.
Okay, well, that's really exciting. Yeah, so okay, so please do head to our website, check out the webcam, and it will be exciting to see what other birds attempt to make a nest once Maya has left for the year. Okay, thank you everybody, and we shall see you all again soon. Enjoy the rest of your evening.